The morning air in Denver carried an unusual chill for late spring, as crowds gathered outside the imposing granite structure of the federal district courthouse. The building stood like a sentinel of justice, its towering columns and pristine steps a testament to the weight of law and order. Inside, the marble hallways echoed with the clicking of expensive leather shoes and the hushed conversations of attorneys preparing for battle. Courtroom 4B, located on the third floor's east wing, was already filling beyond capacity. The case that had drawn such attention was straightforward on the surface: a major drug trafficking operation that had been busted 6 months prior, resulting in 12 arrests and the seizure of over $3 million in narcotics. But what made this hearing particularly noteworthy was the star witness, a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Bruno, one of the most decorated police K-9s in Colorado's history. Judge Margaret Chen entered through her private door at exactly 9:00 a.m., her black robes flowing behind her as she ascended to the bench. At 62 years old, Judge Chen had presided over hundreds of cases in her 23-year career, earning a reputation for being fair but unflinching. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in her signature bun, and her sharp eyes surveyed the packed courtroom with practiced efficiency. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming through the high-ceilinged room. The gallery complied in unison, the sound of bodies rising creating a wave of motion and rustling fabric. As Judge Chen settled into her seat and gestured for everyone to sit, the main doors opened once more. Officer Derek Matthews entered, and the atmosphere in the room immediately shifted. Matthews was 34 years old, with the build of someone who took physical fitness seriously. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished, every crease razor-sharp. But all eyes were drawn to his companion. Bruno moved with the confidence of a trained professional. His black and tan coat gleamed under the courtroom's fluorescent lights, each muscle visible beneath the sleek fur as he walked in perfect heel position beside his handler. The German Shepherd's dark eyes were alert, scanning the room with an intelligence that seemed almost human. His ears stood at attention, rotating slightly to capture every sound. This was a dog who had testified, or rather, demonstrated his abilities, in court dozens of times before. Whispers rippled through the gallery. "That's him," someone murmured. "200 successful busts," another voice added with admiration. Bruno's reputation preceded him. He had been featured in local news segments, had received commendations from the mayor, and was often requested for school demonstrations where children would learn about police work. He was, by all accounts, the perfect K-9 officer, loyal, intelligent, and remarkably disciplined. Officer Matthews guided Bruno to the witness area, where a special mat had been placed for the dog. Bruno settled onto it with practiced ease, sitting in perfect posture, his tail curved neatly around his body. Matthews stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on the dog's head, a gesture that appeared affectionate but was actually a subtle command for Bruno to remain calm and focused. The prosecution attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Linda Morrison, stood to address the judge. "Your Honor, we've called Officer Matthews and K-9 Bruno today to demonstrate the reliability of drug detection that led to the initial search warrant in this case. Bruno's track record speaks for itself, a 97% accuracy rate over his 4-year career." Judge Chen nodded, making a note. "Proceed." The defense attorney, however, was already on his feet. Marcus Webb was known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to find weaknesses in even the most solid cases. "Your Honor, we intend to challenge the reliability of this so-called evidence. A dog's behavior can be influenced by its handler, consciously or unconsciously. We have expert witnesses who will testify." "Save it for cross-examination, Mr. Webb," Judge Chen interrupted, though not unkindly. "Let's see the demonstration first." As the attorneys settled into their positions, the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the chance to see the legendary Bruno in action. Several journalists in the gallery had their notebooks ready, and a sketch artist in the corner began capturing the scene, her pencil moving rapidly across paper. The tension in the room was palpable. The defendants, 3 men in orange jumpsuits seated at the defense table, watched with expressions ranging from resignation to barely concealed anger. Their futures hung in the balance, and much of their fate rested on the testimony that was about to unfold, testimony from a dog who couldn't speak but whose actions could send them to prison for decades. Officer Matthews began to explain the demonstration protocol, his voice steady and professional. Bruno has been trained in the detection of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and MDMA. Today's demonstration will show his ability to identify hidden narcotics in a controlled setting, similar to the circumstances under which he alerted during the traffic stop that led to this case. A bailiff brought forward several identical black bags, placing them in a row on a table that had been set up for this purpose. One of the bags, as Morrison explained, contained a small quantity of cocaine sealed in multiple layers of plastic. The others were empty. Bruno's job was to identify which bag contained the contraband. The courtroom held its collective breath. But then, from the back of the room, came an unexpected sound, the heavy door creaking open once more. Several heads turned in annoyance at the interruption. Judge Chen's expression showed her displeasure at the disturbance. Through the door stepped Sofia Rodriguez, a petite woman in her early 30s with worried eyes. She moved quickly but quietly, trying not to draw attention. And clutching her hand, taking small hurried steps to keep up, was a little girl in a bright pink dress decorated with white flowers. The child's dark curls bounced with each step, and her large brown eyes took in the strange, serious room with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Sofia was a court-appointed interpreter, fluent in both English and Spanish, and she'd received an emergency call just 40 minutes earlier. Her regular babysitter had canceled, and with no other options available, Sofia had been forced to bring her 3-year-old daughter Emma with her. She'd called ahead, and the court administrator had reluctantly agreed, provided the child remained absolutely silent. They slipped into the back row as quietly as possible. Sofia pulled out a small bag containing crayons and a coloring book, whispering urgently to Emma in rapid Spanish. "You must be quiet, Mija. Very, very quiet. This is an important place where people can't make noise." Emma nodded solemnly, her expression serious beyond her years. She accepted the coloring book and settled onto the bench, her little legs sticking straight out in front of her, unable to reach the floor. Judge Chen had noted their arrival but said nothing, her attention returning to the demonstration about to begin. The interruption was forgotten as quickly as it had occurred. Officer Matthews gave Bruno a command in German, search. The magnificent German shepherd rose fluidly to his feet and approached the table. His nose began working immediately, moving methodically from bag to bag. The room was so quiet that people could hear the soft sound of the dog's breathing as he investigated each item. Sofia, meanwhile, had her attention divided between the proceedings and her daughter. She needed to be ready to interpret at a moment's notice, but she also needed to ensure Emma stayed quiet and occupied. She glanced down to check on the little girl, who appeared engrossed in her coloring book, carefully selecting a purple crayon to color what looked like a flower. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. No one in that courtroom, not Judge Chen with her decades of experience, not Officer Matthews with his decorated K9, not the attorneys preparing their arguments, not the journalists documenting the scene, and certainly not Sofia Rodriguez, could have predicted what was about to happen. No one could have imagined that in just a few moments, the small child in the pink dress, quietly coloring in the back row, would speak 2 simple words that would bring this entire proceeding to a crashing halt. 2 words that would expose a carefully hidden secret. 2 words that would change multiple lives forever. But for now, in this moment of suspended anticipation, The courtroom remained focused on Bruno as he continued his search, unaware that the real drama was about to unfold from the most unexpected source imaginable. The silence held, and then it shattered. Emma Rodriguez had been the picture of obedience for the first 15 minutes. Her small hand gripped the purple crayon with determination as she carefully stayed within the lines of a butterfly she was coloring. Sophia glanced down periodically, relieved that her daughter was living up to her promise to be quiet. The 3-year-old's tongue poked out slightly from the corner of her mouth in concentration, a habit she did since she first learned to hold a crayon. The courtroom proceedings continued with methodical precision. Bruno had successfully identified the bag containing cocaine, sitting alertly beside it while Officer Matthews praised him. The prosecution looked pleased. The defense attorney, Marcus Webb, was already formulating his cross-examination strategy, tapping his pen against his legal pad in a rhythm that suggested deep thought. Judge Chen called for a brief pause to allow the bailiff to reset the demonstration with a different configuration. "We'll run the test 3 times total," she announced, "to establish pattern reliability." There was a general shuffling in the gallery as people adjusted in their seats, cleared throats, and exchanged whispered comments about what they'd just witnessed. It was during this lull, this moment of relaxed attention, that everything changed. Sophia had just turned her focus back to the front of the courtroom, scanning the document she might need to translate, when she felt it, a subtle but unmistakable change in her daughter's energy. The sensation every mother knows, that sixth sense that something is wrong even before any obvious signs appear. Emma's crayon had stopped moving. The purple Crayola remained suspended above the paper, frozen mid-stroke across the butterfly's wing. Sophia's eyes dropped to her daughter's hand and noticed it first, the trembling. Emma's small fingers were shaking so badly that the crayon was vibrating, creating a faint scratching sound against the paper. "Mija," Sophia whispered, leaning down closer to her daughter, "what's wrong?" But Emma didn't respond. She didn't even seem to hear her mother's voice. The little girl's eyes had locked onto something across the courtroom with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. Sophia followed her daughter's gaze, trying to understand what had captured such terrifying attention. Emma was staring at Bruno. The German Shepherd had returned to his mat and was sitting in his perfect, disciplined pose, waiting for the next phase of the demonstration. He appeared completely calm, professional, unremarkable, exactly as he had since entering the courtroom. Yet Emma's reaction suggested she was looking at something monstrous. "Emma, baby, what is it?" Sophia's whisper grew more urgent. She placed her hand on her daughter's small shoulder and felt the tension radiating through the child's entire body. Emma had gone rigid, every muscle locked in place. The color was draining from Emma's face in a way that terrified Sophia. The healthy pink of her cheeks faded to pale, then to an almost grayish white. Her breathing had changed too, no longer the soft, easy breaths of a child contentedly coloring, but rapid, shallow gasps that came faster and faster. Emma's eyes had gone wide, wider than Sophia had ever seen them. The whites showed all around her dark irises, giving her the appearance of someone in absolute shock. Her pupils were dilated and she wasn't blinking, just staring at that dog with an expression that combined recognition, terror, and something else Sophia couldn't quite identify, something primal. "Emma, you're scaring Mommy," Sophia said, abandoning her whisper for a low, urgent tone. She gently shook her daughter's shoulder. "Emma, look at me. Look at Mama." But the little girl couldn't tear her gaze away. It was as if she were trapped in a trance, unable to break the connection between her eyes and the German Shepherd across the room. Her small chest was rising and falling rapidly now, her breathing becoming more labored. Sophia recognized the signs. Emma was heading toward a panic attack. Several people in the nearby rows had begun to notice the child's strange behavior. An elderly man in a gray suit turned around, his expression moving from annoyance at the disturbance to concern when he saw Emma's face. A woman in the row ahead glanced back, her eyes widening at the sight of the terrified child. Sophia tried to physically turn Emma's head away from the dog, but her daughter resisted with surprising strength. The 3-year-old's neck muscles were taut, fighting against her mother's gentle pressure. A small whimpering sound emerged from Emma's throat, not quite a cry, not quite a word, but a sound of pure distress. "Emma, please," Sophia begged quietly, aware that they were starting to draw attention from more of the gallery. "Tell Mommy what's wrong. Use your words, baby." At the front of the courtroom, Officer Matthews had begun the second demonstration. He was explaining something about scent particles and airflow, but his voice seemed to fade into background noise as Sophia's entire world narrowed to her daughter's inexplicable terror. Emma's trembling had intensified. It wasn't just her hands anymore. Her entire body was shaking as if she were freezing, though the courtroom was comfortably warm. The purple crayon slipped from her fingers and rolled across the coloring book, leaving a jagged line across the butterfly before falling to the floor with a soft clatter. The sound seemed to break something in Emma. Her mouth opened, working silently as if she were trying to form words but couldn't push them past her lips. Her small hands balled into fists, and she began to rock slightly back and forth, a self-soothing behavior Sophia had seen during Emma's worst nightmares. The nightmares. Sophia's blood ran cold as the realization hit her. Emma had been having nightmares for months, terrible, screaming nightmares that left her soaked in sweat and crying for hours. Nightmares that had started after the incident. "Oh God," Sophia breathed, her own hands beginning to shake now. "Oh God, Emma, is it?" But she couldn't finish the question, couldn't bring herself to voice what she was beginning to suspect. It was impossible. It couldn't be, could it? At the front of the courtroom, Bruno had identified the correct bag again. Several people applauded lightly. Judge Chen nodded in approval, making notes. The prosecution attorney smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Except in the back row, where a 3-year-old girl was coming apart. Emma's rocking had become more pronounced. Tears were forming in her eyes, threatening to spill over. Her breathing was now coming in harsh gasps that sounded painful. Sophia wrapped her arms around her daughter, trying to provide comfort, but Emma pushed against her, still unable to look away from the dog. "No, no, no," Emma finally whispered, so quietly that only Sophia could hear. The words were barely audible, more breath than sound. "No, no, 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 no." "Emma, what is it?" Sophia pleaded, her own heart racing now. "Tell Mommy what's wrong with the doggy." At the word doggy, Emma's whole body jerked as if she'd been shocked. Her breathing hitched, catching in her throat. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, running down her pale cheeks in silent streams. More heads were turning now. The whispered conversations in the gallery had shifted from the demonstration to the distressed child in the back. A bailiff near the side wall had noticed and was watching with concern, trying to determine if intervention was necessary. Judge Chen, with her finely tuned courtroom awareness, sensed the disturbance even before she saw it. Her eyes lifted from her notes and scanned the gallery, quickly locating the source of disruption. Her expression showed displeasure. She had reluctantly allowed the child in the courtroom, and now it appeared that decision had been a mistake. "Is there a problem?" Judge Chen's voice cut through the courtroom, silencing all other sound. Every eye turned to the back row, to Sophia, who looked mortified and frightened, and to Emma, who sat trembling and crying, still staring at the German shepherd with those impossibly wide eyes. Sophia stood up, preparing to apologize and leave, to take her daughter out of the courtroom before they caused any more disruption. She reached down to pick Emma up, to carry her out and deal with whatever was happening in private. But Emma had other plans. As Sophia's hands touched her daughter's small body, something inside the little girl seemed to snap. All the fear, all the recognition, all the trauma that had been building since the moment she'd laid eyes on Bruno, It all came together in a surge of desperate need to be heard. Emma pulled away from her mother's grasp with shocking force for such a small child. Before Sophia could stop her, before anyone could react, Emma stood up on the wooden bench, gaining precious inches of height. Her small legs steadied beneath her, and her tiny arm rose, shaking violently, pointing across the courtroom. Pointing directly at Bruno. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Time itself appeared to slow. Every person in that room, the judge, the attorneys, the defendants, the officers, the journalists, the gallery, every single person turned to look at the small figure in the pink dress, standing on a bench with her arm extended, tears streaming down her face. Emma's mouth opened, and the silence shattered. The words that came from Emma Rodriguez's mouth pierced the courtroom silence like a knife through fabric, sharp, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. "Bad doggy." Her voice, high-pitched and trembling with emotion, carried with surprising force through the high-ceilinged room. The acoustics, designed to carry testimony clearly to every corner, amplified the child's cry until it seemed to echo off the wood-paneled walls. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire courtroom existed in a state of suspended shock, every face turned toward the small girl standing on the bench in her pink dress, her arms still extended, pointing with accusatory precision at the decorated police K9. Judge Chen's gavel, which she had been raising to restore order, froze in midair. Her mouth opened slightly in surprise, an expression of genuine shock that few had ever seen on the typically composed judge's face. Officer Matthews' head snapped toward the back of the courtroom, his face registering confusion and the beginning of something that looked like offense. His hand, which had been resting protectively on Bruno's head, tightened reflexively in the dog's fur. Bruno himself remained motionless, still sitting in his perfect pose, but his ears had rotated toward the sound of the child's voice. His dark eyes, intelligent and alert, fixed on the small figure pointing at him. Emma wasn't finished. If anything, her first cry had broken through whatever dam had been holding back her words. Her small body was shaking so violently now that Sophia feared she might fall from the bench. But Emma's voice only grew stronger, more insistent, fueled by months of suppressed trauma suddenly finding its release. "Bad doggy," she screamed again, louder this time, her voice cracking with the force of her emotion. "Bad doggy hurt Emma." The courtroom erupted. Gasps rippled through the gallery like a wave. People half rose from their seats, craning to see better. The journalists' pencils flew across their notebooks, capturing every word. The sketch artist abandoned her careful rendering of Bruno and began frantically drawing the pointing child instead. "Order!" Judge Chen's voice rang out as her gavel finally came down, the sharp crack of wood on wood competing with the rising chaos. "Order in this court." But Emma was beyond hearing, beyond caring about courtroom protocol or proper behavior. 6 months of nightmares, 6 months of fear, 6 months of her young mind trying to process trauma it was too young to understand. It all came pouring out in a flood of desperate words. He bite me," Emma sobbed, her free hand moving to her left arm. With jerky, panicked movements, she began pushing up the sleeve of her pink dress, struggling with the fabric. Look what bad doggy did." Sophia had been frozen in shock, but her daughter's actions jolted her back to awareness. "Emma, no, Mija." She reached for her daughter, trying to pull her down, trying to cover her arm, trying to stop whatever was happening. But Emma twisted away with a strength born of desperation. The sleeve came up. Even from the back of the courtroom, even in the fluorescent lighting, the scar was visible. It ran from just below Emma's elbow down to her wrist, a jagged, angry line of pink and white tissue. The mark of teeth. The unmistakable pattern of a large dog's bite that had torn through a child's delicate flesh. "Sweet Jesus," someone in the gallery whispered. Officer Matthews shot to his feet, his face flushing red. Your Honor, this is insane. His voice boomed through the courtroom, loud enough to make several people flinch. I don't know what this child thinks she saw, but Bruno has never attacked anyone. This is my partner, I know him. I trust him with my life. That bad doggy, Emma screamed back, her voice rising to match his. The little girl was hysterical now, tears and snot streaming down her face, her body convulsing with sobs. That bad doggy hurt me. He bite my arm and my back and he hurt me so bad. She twisted, trying to reach behind her to show more scars. Sophia, tears now streaming down her own face, finally managed to grab her daughter and pull her into a tight embrace. But Emma fought against her mother's arms, still pointing, still crying, still accusing. Bad doggy, bad doggy, bad doggy. The words became a chant, a mantra, punctuated by heartbroken sobs. Judge Chen was on her feet now, her gavel coming down repeatedly. Order, I will have order. Her voice, usually so controlled, carried an edge of steel. The bailiffs moved forward, unsure of their role in this unprecedented situation. Marcus Webb, the defense attorney, had risen as well, his opportunistic instincts immediately recognizing the potential significance of what was unfolding. Your Honor, I think we need to. Everyone sit down and be quiet, Judge Chen commanded, her eyes flashing. The authority in her voice was absolute. Even Emma's cries quieted slightly, though she continued to sob against her mother's shoulder. Sophia remained standing, clutching her daughter, her own body shaking. Your Honor, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I didn't realize, her voice broke. Please, I need to take her out, I need to. No, Judge Chen's voice was firm but no longer angry. Her experienced eyes had seen something in that moment of chaos, some truth in the child's terror that couldn't be dismissed as simple misbehavior or imagination. No, Mrs. Rodriguez, stay where you are. Everyone, sit down. Now. The command in her voice brooked no argument. Slowly, reluctantly, people settled back into their seats. Officer Matthews remained standing for a moment longer, his face a mask of indignation and confusion, before Judge Chen's pointed look forced him to sit as well. The courtroom fell into a tense, fragile silence, broken only by Emma's continued whimpering and Sophia's attempts to soothe her daughter in soft Spanish. Judge Chen set down her gavel carefully, deliberately. Her mind was already working through the implications of what had just occurred. She looked at Sophia, who was still standing in the back row, rocking Emma gently. Mrs. Rodriguez, Judge Chen's voice was measured now, careful. I need you to explain, clearly and completely. What is your daughter talking about? Sophia's voice shook as she tried to speak. Emma clung to her neck, face buried in her mother's shoulder, still trembling. Your Honor, 6 months ago. She took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. 6 months ago, my daughter was attacked by a dog. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Officer Matthews made a sound of protest, but Judge Chen held up her hand, silencing him without looking in his direction. Her focus remained on Sophia. Go on, the judge prompted gently. It was April 20th, Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength even as tears continued to roll down her cheeks. A Saturday afternoon, Emma was playing in our backyard. We have a fence, a 6-foot privacy fence, but somehow a dog got in, a German shepherd. She paused, feeling her daughter tense against her at the words. It attacked her, viciously. Emma let out a small cry and burrowed deeper against her mother. I heard her screaming from inside the house, Sophia continued, the words pouring out now. By the time I got outside, the dog had her on the ground. It had bitten her arm, her back, her leg. There was so much blood, so much blood. Her voice broke and she had to pause to collect herself. The courtroom remained deathly silent. Every eye was fixed on the mother and daughter in the back row. I grabbed a garden shovel and hit the dog, Sophia said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. It let go of Emma and ran, disappeared, jumped the fence and was gone. I called 911. Emma was in the hospital for 3 days. She needed surgery to repair the damage to her arm. The bite on her back required over 30 stitches. "Did you file a police report?" Judge Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes, immediately, but we never found the dog. No one in our neighborhood had seen it before. No one knew where it came from. Animal control searched for weeks. Nothing." Sophia's hand stroked her daughter's hair. Emma was so traumatized she couldn't talk about it. She wouldn't go outside. She had nightmares every night. The child psychologist said she'd blocked out the details of the attack, that her mind was too young to process what had happened to her. Sophia lifted her head, her eyes finding Officer Matthews across the courtroom. Her voice hardened. "Until today, until she saw that dog." "That's impossible," Matthews repeated, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "Bruno has been with me every day, every single day for 3 years. He's never been aggressive toward anyone, least of all a child." Judge Chen held up her hand again. She turned to one of the bailiffs. "Call Detective Morrison from the courthouse police. I want him here immediately." She looked at Sophia. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what is your address?" Sophia gave it. A residential area about 8 miles from the courthouse. Judge Chen wrote it down, then looked at Officer Matthews. "Where do you live, officer?" Matthews hesitated, seeming to realize for the first time the true gravity of the situation. "Your Honor, I really think this is." "Your address, Officer Matthews." He gave it, 7 miles from Sophia's address, close enough to be significant. Emma had lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. Her face was blotchy and wet, her eyes red and swollen. But she pointed once more at Bruno, her small arm shaking. "Bad doggy has broken ear," she said, her voice small and hoarse from crying. Emma remembers broken ear. Every head in the courtroom swiveled toward Bruno. The German shepherd still sat in perfect position, a model of discipline and training. His coat gleamed. His posture was impeccable. His eyes remained alert and intelligent. And there, on his left ear, clearly visible to everyone now that they were looking for it, was a distinctive notch. A piece missing from the top edge of the ear, creating a jagged, irregular edge. An old injury, healed long ago, that had left a permanent mark. A broken ear. Officer Derek Matthews' face went from red to white in an instant. His hand, still resting on Bruno's head, began to tremble. The courtroom remained frozen in that terrible moment of recognition. Every eye moved from Emma's small, pointing finger to Bruno's distinctively notched ear, then back again. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of a truth that was suddenly, horrifyingly undeniable. Sophia Rodriguez's legs gave out. She collapsed back onto the bench, still clutching Emma to her chest, but her strength had simply evaporated. Her mind was reeling, spinning through 6 months of agony, 6 months of searching, 6 months of watching her baby daughter scream through nightmares. And all that time the dog responsible had been here, had been celebrated, had been lauded as a hero. "Oh my God," Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. Then louder, "Oh my God." The words came out as a wail, a mother's anguish finally finding its voice. Emma, startled by her mother's cry, began sobbing again, and the sound of mother and daughter crying together created a heart-wrenching symphony that made even the hardest hearts in that courtroom soften. "Your Honor," Sophia stood again, this time with fury replacing shock. Her dark eyes blazed with an emotion that transcended mere anger. It was the primal rage of a mother whose child had been harmed. "That dog nearly killed my daughter. We searched everywhere, everywhere. The police came to our neighborhood, knocked on every door, checked every yard. Animal control set traps. We put up flyers with a description of the dog. We offered a reward." Her voice rose with each sentence, months of frustration and pain pouring out. Emma clung to her, crying, but Sophia couldn't stop now. The floodgates had opened. "You know what it's like to watch your 3-year-old baby scream herself awake every night? Do you know what it's like to see her flinch at the sound of a dog barking 3 blocks away? To watch her refuse to play outside, refuse to go to the park, refused to visit her grandmother because there's a small dog next door. Sophia's tears flowed freely now, her voice breaking with emotion. She stopped talking for 2 weeks after the attack. 2 weeks. The doctors thought she might have permanent trauma-induced mutism. Judge Chen had set down her gavel and was listening with an expression that mixed professional gravity with deep personal sympathy. She was a grandmother herself, and the image of this small child suffering was clearly affecting her. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Judge Chen said gently, "I need you to tell me everything. Every detail you can remember about the attack. Take your time." Sophia nodded, trying to compose herself. She sat down again, adjusting Emma in her lap so she could speak more clearly. Emma had quieted somewhat, exhausted from crying, but her eyes remained fixed on Bruno with unwavering terror and recognition. "It was Saturday, April 20th, around 2:30 in the afternoon," Sophia began, her voice steadier now but still thick with emotion. "I was doing dishes in the kitchen. Emma was in the backyard, our fenced backyard that we thought was safe, playing with her dollhouse. It was a beautiful day, sunny and warm." She paused, her hand unconsciously stroking Emma's hair as she spoke. "I heard her scream. Not a regular scream. Parents know the difference between their child's screams. This was pure terror, pure pain. I dropped the dish I was holding and ran. It shattered on the floor, but I didn't care." Sophia's breathing became more rapid as she relived the moment. "When I got to the back door, I saw her on the ground. There was this huge German shepherd on top of her. Emma was trying to crawl away, but the dog had her arm in its mouth. It was shaking its head." Her voice broke. "God, it was shaking its head the way dogs do with toys, except it was my baby's arm." Someone in the gallery made a sound of horror. Several people had their hands over their mouths. There was blood everywhere, on the grass, on Emma's dress, on the dog's muzzle. Emma was screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, help me." And I grabbed the first thing I could reach. Our garden shovel was leaning against the house. I ran at the dog, screaming, and hit it as hard as I could on its back. Officer Matthews flinched visibly at this, his hand tightening protectively on Bruno's head. "The dog let go of Emma's arm and turned toward me," Sophia continued. "For a second I thought it was going to attack me instead. Its teeth were bared and there was this low growl. But when I raised the shovel again, it ran, just turned and ran. It jumped our 6-foot fence like it was nothing and disappeared into the alley behind our house." "Did you get a clear look at the dog?" Judge Chen asked. "Yes, absolutely yes. A large German shepherd, black and tan coloring, very muscular and clearly well-trained." And Sophia looked directly at Bruno now, her eyes narrowing. "It had a notched left ear. I remember thinking it looked like someone had cut a piece out of it. That detail stuck with me because it was so distinctive. I told the police. I told animal control. I told everyone who would listen. Look for a German shepherd with a damaged left ear." Marcus Webb, the defense attorney, was writing furiously on his legal pad. The prosecution attorney, Linda Morrison, had gone pale and was staring at her star witness, the dog, with dawning horror. "I scooped Emma up and called 911, Sophia continued. "The ambulance came within 8 minutes, but it felt like hours. Emma was in shock. She'd lost a lot of blood. They rushed her to Denver Health Medical Center. She had emergency surgery that night to repair the damage to her arm. The bite had torn through muscle tissue and come dangerously close to a major artery. The surgeon said if the bite had been just a centimeter to the left." She couldn't finish that sentence. Didn't need to, everyone understood. "She also had a deep bite wound on her back, between her shoulder blades, and several puncture wounds on her left thigh where the dog had initially grabbed her and pulled her down. They kept her in the hospital for 3 days to monitor for infection, and because she was so traumatized, they were worried about her psychological state." Emma, listening to her mother recount the attack, had begun to shake again. She turned her face into Sophia's neck, whimpering softly. "I'm sorry, baby," Sophia murmured to her daughter, then looked up at the judge. "The police came to the hospital. I filed a report. I gave them every detail I could remember. They sent animal control officers to our neighborhood for weeks. They searched a 3-mile radius. They checked veterinary records for German shepherds matching the description. They found nothing. It was like the dog had vanished into thin air. She paused, her expression hardening. The investigating officer told me that a dog like I described, well-trained, muscular, clearly cared for, probably belonged to someone, that it wasn't a stray. But without finding it, there was nothing they could do. The case went cold after about 6 weeks. Judge Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Rodriguez, in all the time since the attack, has Emma ever been able to describe or identify her attacker until today? Sophia shook her head. No, Your Honor. The child psychologist said it's common for very young children who experience severe trauma to block out the details. Emma wouldn't talk about the attack at all. If we tried to ask her what happened, she would start crying and shut down completely. The therapist said to give her time, that she might remember eventually, or she might not. We were just trying to help her feel safe again. But she recognized Bruno today, Judge Chen stated. Immediately, Sophia confirmed. The moment we walked in and she saw him, I could feel her tense up. At first, I didn't understand why. But then I saw where she was looking and the way she was looking, and Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I did. That's the dog. That's the one that hurt my baby. Officer Matthews could remain silent no longer. He stood abruptly, his face flushed with emotion, anger, fear, and something else. Desperation, perhaps. Your Honor, this is absolutely insane. His voice was loud, almost shouting. You're going to take the word of a traumatized 3-year-old over the documented record of one of the most decorated K-9 units in the state. Bruno has been evaluated psychologically every 6 months since he started service. He's never shown aggression towards civilians. Never. He's been in schools, at public events, around hundreds of children. This is character assassination of a police K-9, based on a child's confused memory. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked true conviction. There was a tremor in it, a hint of something that sounded almost like guilt. Judge Chen's eyes were sharp as they fixed on Officer Matthews. Officer, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I remind you that you are in a court of law. Where was Bruno on Saturday, April 20th, between the hours of noon and 6 p.m.? Matthews hesitated. The hesitation was brief, maybe 2 seconds, but in the tense silence of the courtroom it might as well have been an hour. Everyone saw it. Everyone noted it. He was with me, Matthews said, but his voice was quieter now. It was my day off. Bruno was home with me. All day, Judge Chen pressed. Another hesitation, longer this time. Officer Matthews, all day. Matthews' face was losing color now. I had an appointment that afternoon. My girlfriend was watching him. The courtroom seemed to inhale collectively. Your girlfriend was watching Bruno, Judge Chen repeated slowly, carefully. And where were you? My brother's wedding, Matthews said quietly. In Colorado Springs. I left around noon and got back around 7 p.m. So Bruno was alone with your girlfriend for approximately 7 hours, Judge Chen stated. And during that time, you cannot personally account for the dog's whereabouts. Matthews said nothing. His hand had dropped from Bruno's head, and he stood there looking suddenly smaller, diminished. From her seat, Sophia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, the bitter sound of someone whose world has just been simultaneously validated and shattered. You knew, she whispered, her eyes locked on Matthews. Oh my God, you knew. Silence that followed Sophia's accusation was deafening. Officer Derek Matthews stood motionless, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The confident, decorated K-9 officer who had entered the courtroom less than an hour ago now looked like a man standing on the edge of a crumbling cliff. Officer Matthews, Judge Chen's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I strongly suggest you consider your answer carefully. Did you, at any point after April 20th, become aware that Bruno might have been involved in an attack on a child? The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Matthews looked around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. His eyes landed on Bruno, who sat obediently on his mat, completely unaware of the human drama unfolding around him. The dog's tail had begun to wag slightly, sensing his handler's distress and trying to offer comfort in the only way he knew how. "Your Honor, Matthew's voice was barely audible. "I need to speak with an attorney." The courtroom erupted again. Journalists scribbled furiously. The defense attorney Marcus Webb was on his feet immediately, sensing blood in the water. Even the defendants in their orange jumpsuits were leaning forward, their own legal troubles momentarily forgotten in the face of this unfolding drama. Judge Chen brought her gavel down sharply. "Officer Matthews, you are not currently under arrest or accusation. However, I am ordering a bailiff to escort you and Bruno to a secure holding area. You are not to leave this building. Bailiff Johnson, please take Officer Matthews into custody for questioning. Bailiff Rodriguez," she paused, nodding the surname. "Bailiff Chen, please secure the K9. Two bailiffs moved forward. Matthews looked like he might resist for a moment, his hand reaching protectively for Bruno, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. He allowed himself to be led toward the side door, Bruno following on his lead, the dog's ears back in confusion at the sudden change in routine. As they reached the door, Matthew stopped and turned back toward Sophia and Emma. His eyes were red-rimmed, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, I'm so sorry." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud that seemed to echo with finality. Judge Chen turned to her clerk. "I want Detective Morrison from Courthouse Police here immediately. I also want Animal Control, the district attorney's office, and—" She paused, looking at Sophia and Emma with an expression of deep sympathy. "And Child Services to provide immediate crisis counseling for the child. Mrs. Rodriguez, do you have family who can come be with you?" Sophia nodded numbly, still processing what had just happened. Emma had gone quiet in her mother's arms, exhausted from the emotional storm, but her eyes remained wide and watchful. The courtroom had transformed into organized chaos. The original drug trafficking case was forgotten, abandoned in the wake of something far more serious. The defendants were escorted back to holding. The attorneys gathered in hushed clusters, already calculating the implications. This case was over. Any evidence obtained through Bruno's detection would now be challenged, likely successfully. But that was the least of anyone's concerns at the moment. Within 90 minutes, the scene had shifted to a conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Detective Sarah Morrison, no relation to the prosecutor, had arrived and taken charge of the rapidly expanding investigation. She was a 20-year veteran with the Denver Police Department, specializing in animal attacks and dangerous dog cases. Her sharp features and no-nonsense demeanor commanded immediate respect. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Detective Morrison began, her voice professional but kind. "I need to go through everything again in detail. I know it's difficult, but every piece of information matters." Sophia had been joined by her sister, Maria, who sat beside her providing support while Emma dozed fitfully in her mother's lap, finally surrendered to exhausted sleep. Sophia nodded and began recounting the attack once more, this time with Detective Morrison stopping her frequently to ask specific questions. "You said the dog jumped your fence. How high is your fence?" 6 feet, solid wood privacy fence." "And you're certain about the time, 2:30 p.m. "Absolutely certain. I remember because Emma's favorite show had just ended at 2, and I'd promised her she could play outside for an hour before we had to start getting ready for her cousin's birthday party at 5. Detective Morrison made notes. "And you hit the dog with a shovel. Did you notice if you drew blood?" Sophia thought carefully. "I don't think so. I hit it on the back on its body. The shovel was wooden, not metal. It definitely hurt the dog, it yelped, but I don't remember seeing blood on it. Good, that's helpful. Detective Morrison looked up. Mrs. Rodriguez, when the police canvassed your neighborhood in the days following the attack, did any officers specifically ask about police K9s? Sophia's eyes widened. No, they didn't. They asked about people who own German Shepherds, but they never considered it might be a police dog. Because why would they? Detective Morrison said grimly. Police K9s are supposed to be accounted for at all times. They're considered officers. The assumption would be that if a police dog had been involved in an attack, it would have been reported immediately through official channels. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Officer Matthews lives at 2847 Cascade Avenue. You live at 1923 Morrison Street. That's a 6.3-mile distance. A straight line through the alleys and residential areas would be shorter, maybe 4 miles. For a fit, trained dog like Bruno, that's less than 20 minutes of running. Sophia felt sick. You think he ran from Matthew's house to my neighborhood? I think that's exactly what happened. Detective Morrison turned back, her expression hard. And I think we're going to prove it. The conference room door opened, and a younger detective entered, carrying a tablet. Detective Morrison, you need to see this. On the screen was security footage from a residential camera system, time-stamped April 20th at 2:47 p.m. The image quality was grainy but clear enough. A German Shepherd, running at full speed down an alley, a notch clearly visible in its left ear, even in the low-resolution video. Where did you get this? Morrison asked sharply. House on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the Rodriguez residence. The homeowner had a security system that kept footage for 6 months before auto-deleting. We got to it just in time. It was scheduled to be erased next week. This camera faces the alley behind their house. Morrison zoomed in on the dog's face. Even in the pixelated image, the notch in the ear was unmistakable. But there was something else too, something dark around the dog's muzzle. Is that blood? Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. We'll need to enhance the image to be certain, but yes, I believe it is. Detective Morrison's jaw was set in a grim line. She looked at the younger detective. I want every security camera in a 5-mile radius between Matthew's address and the Rodriguez house. Every single one. Map the dog's route. And I want to know if there are any cameras near Matthew's residence that might show Bruno leaving. Already on it, the young detective confirmed. But detective, there's something else. He swiped to another screen. We pulled Matthew's phone records. At 3:15 p.m. on April 20th, he received a call from his girlfriend, Jennifer Cole. The call lasted 43 seconds. Morrison's eyes narrowed. 43 seconds. Long enough for her to tell him something had happened. That's what I thought too, so I pulled his phone's GPS data. Another swipe. Matthew's phone was at the wedding venue in Colorado Springs all afternoon, as he said. But look at this, at 3:16 p.m., immediately after that call from his girlfriend, his phone starts moving. He left the wedding. And here's where it gets interesting. At 4:02 p.m., his phone pings from a tower near Hampton Avenue and Colorado Boulevard. Sophia gasped. That's 10 minutes from my house. Exactly, Morrison said quietly. He wasn't checking on his girlfriend's well-being. He was checking on his dog. Or more specifically, he was making sure his dog got home without being caught. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. A girlfriend panicking after the dog escaped. A phone call to her boyfriend at his brother's wedding. A K9 officer who left his own brother's wedding to secretly retrieve his dog before anyone could identify it. And then, worst of all, silence. Deliberate, calculated silence while a family suffered and searched in vain for answers. Did he know? Sophia asked, her voice shaking with rage. Did he know that day? Did he know Bruno attacked Emma? Detective Morrison looked at the evidence on the screen, then back at Sophia. Her expression was answer enough, but she spoke the words anyway. We're going to find out exactly what Officer Matthews knew and when he knew it. But based on this, she gestured to the phone records. Yes, Mrs. Rodriguez, I believe he knew. Perhaps not the full extent of Emma's injuries, but he knew something serious had happened, and he chose to cover it up. Sophia's sister Maria wrapped an arm around her shoulders as Sophia began to cry, not the frightened tears of earlier, but tears of rage and vindication. For 6 months, she'd been made to feel like she was chasing ghosts. For 6 months, her daughter had suffered nightmares while the dog responsible had been celebrated and rewarded. I want him prosecuted, Sophia said through her tears, her voice hard as steel. Not just for what Bruno did, but for the cover-up. For every night Emma woke up screaming, for every therapy session, for every time she flinched at the sound of a dog barking. He knew and he said nothing. We're going to build an airtight case, Detective Morrison promised, against both Officer Matthews and his girlfriend. But Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to prepare you for something. Sophia looked up, wiping her eyes. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The police union will defend Matthews. There will be press. There will be people who won't want to believe that a decorated K-9 officer could do something like this. It's going to be a fight. Sophia looked down at Emma, sleeping restlessly in her arms, and then back up at Detective Morrison. Let them come, she said quietly. My daughter pointed at that dog and told the truth when she was too terrified to even speak. If she can be that brave, then so can I. By evening, the conference room had become the command center for what was rapidly evolving into one of the most explosive police misconduct cases Denver had seen in years. Detective Morrison had assembled a team of investigators, and the evidence they were uncovering painted an increasingly damning picture. Officer Derek Matthews sat in an interrogation room 2 floors below, having finally requested and received legal representation. His attorney, a sharp-eyed public defender named Richard Cross who specialized in police cases, had advised him to say nothing. But the walls were closing in, and everyone knew it. The real breakthrough came at 6:47 p.m. Detective Morrison's phone rang and her expression shifted as she listened. Send her up immediately, she said, then turned to the room. Jennifer Cole just walked into the main precinct. She's asking to speak to someone about the Rodriguez case. She says she wants to tell the truth. Sophia, who had been waiting with her sister while Emma slept on a makeshift bed of coats in the corner, sat up straight. His girlfriend. Yes, Morrison was already moving toward the door. Mrs. Rodriguez, I know you want to hear this, but I can't allow you in the interrogation room. However, I can have you watch from the observation room. Would you like that? Sophia nodded emphatically. Maria agreed to stay with Emma, and within minutes, Sophia found herself standing behind one-way glass, watching as a young woman with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands was led into the interrogation room. Jennifer Cole was 28 years old, petite, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, and she looked like she'd been crying for hours. When she sat down at the metal table, her hands immediately began fidgeting with the sleeves of her sweatshirt, pulling them down over her palms in a nervous gesture. Detective Morrison entered the room with a younger detective, Thomas Walsh, who would be taking notes. Morrison's approach was gentle, non-threatening. She could see that Jennifer Cole was already on the verge of breaking. Ms. Cole, thank you for coming in, Morrison began, sitting down across from Jennifer. I understand you want to make a statement about the events of April 20th. Jennifer nodded, then burst into tears. I can't do this anymore, she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see that little girl on the news. Oh God, she was in court today, wasn't she? That was her, the little girl in the pink dress. Yes, Morrison said quietly. That was Emma Rodriguez. She's 3 years old. Jennifer's face crumpled. She's so little, she's just a baby. Oh God, what have I done? Morrison pushed a box of tissues across the table and waited while Jennifer tried to compose herself. Behind the glass, Sophia watched with a mixture of fury and grim satisfaction. This woman had known. She had known all along. "Jennifer," Morrison said gently, "I need you to tell me everything that happened on April 20th. Start from the beginning. Take your time." Jennifer took a shaky breath and nodded. Derek had to go to his brother's wedding in Colorado Springs. He left around noon. I was supposed to watch Bruno, that's his K9, his German Shepherd. I'd watched Bruno before, lots of times. He was always really good with me, very obedient. She paused, wiping her eyes. Derek kept him in the backyard when he was at home. They have this really secure fence, 6.5 feet tall, and Bruno never tried to get out. He was so well trained. But that day, her voice trailed off. "What happened that day, Jennifer?" "I was inside watching TV. Bruno was in the backyard. I checked on him around 1:30 and he was fine, just lying in the shade. But then I got a phone call from my mom and we were talking about this drama with my sister and I wasn't paying attention." Jennifer's hands twisted the tissue she was holding. "When I finally went to check on Bruno again, it was after 2:30. And he was gone." "Gone?" Morrison prompted. "The gate was open. I swear I'd latched it. I know I did, but it was old and sometimes if you didn't lift it just right when you closed it, the latch wouldn't catch properly. It must have swung open and Bruno just left." Jennifer's voice rose with distress. "I panicked. I ran outside, called his name, but he was gone, completely gone." She looked up at Morrison with desperate eyes. "You have to understand, Derek had told me how important Bruno was, how much his career depended on his K9 partner, how if anything happened to Bruno he'd lose everything. I was terrified." "What did you do?" Morrison asked. "I got in my car and drove around the neighborhood looking for him. I must have driven for 30 minutes, maybe longer. I was calling his name out the window, checking every yard, every alley. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished." Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "And then, around 3:15, he just came back." Behind the glass, Sophia's hands clenched into fists. "Bruno came back on his own?" Morrison asked. "Yes, I'd just gotten back to the house and I was sitting in the car trying to figure out what to do, whether I should call Derek and tell him. And then I saw Bruno trotting up the driveway like nothing had happened." Jennifer's face contorted with the memory. Except there was blood." The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of the recording equipment. "Blood," Morrison's voice remained calm, professional. "On his muzzle, around his mouth, and on his chest, matted in the fur." Jennifer was crying again now, tears streaming down her face. "I knew immediately that something terrible had happened. Bruno wasn't acting aggressive or anything. He seemed confused, almost scared. But the blood, there was so much blood." "What did you do, Jennifer?" "I panicked. I completely panicked. I got the garden hose and washed him off right there in the driveway. The blood was already starting to dry, so I had to really work at it. I used dog shampoo, scrubbed him thoroughly. It took maybe 20 minutes to get him completely clean." Her voice was filled with self-loathing. "I was so scared. All I could think about was how angry Derek would be, how this would ruin his career. I wasn't thinking about. I didn't let myself think about where the blood came from." Morrison leaned forward slightly. "But you suspected, didn't you?" Jennifer nodded miserably. "I knew. Of course I knew. Dogs don't come home with that much blood on them unless something bad happened. But I told myself maybe he'd gotten in a fight with another dog. Maybe he'd killed a rabbit or something. I told myself anything except what I knew deep down was probably true." "Did you call Officer Matthews?" "Yes. After I'd cleaned Bruno up and put him back in the yard, and this time I made absolutely sure the latch was secure, I called Derek. I told him Bruno had gotten out but that I'd found him and he was fine. Derek was furious. He started asking questions. How long was he gone? Did anyone see him? Was he hurt?" Jennifer's hands were shaking as she continued. "I lied. I told him Bruno was only gone for maybe 15 minutes, that I'd found him right away, that he was completely fine. I didn't mention the blood. I was too scared. But Derek found out anyway, didn't he? Morrison said, her tone knowing. Jennifer looked up surprised. How did you? We have his phone records, Jennifer. We know he left the wedding shortly after you called. We know he drove back toward Denver. What happened when he got home? Jennifer's shoulders sagged in defeat. He got home around 4:30. He'd left his brother's wedding. He was so angry, not at me, but at the situation. The first thing he did was examine Bruno. He looked at his teeth, his paws, checked him all over, and then he found it. Found what? A small tuft of pink fabric caught between two of Bruno's back teeth. I'd missed it when I was cleaning him. Jennifer's voice broke. It looked like it came from clothing, children's clothing. Derek just stared at it for the longest time. Then he looked at me and asked if there'd been blood. The interrogation room was utterly silent. I couldn't lie to him anymore. I told him yes. I told him about washing Bruno, about how much blood there was. Derek went completely white. He asked me what time Bruno had come back, and when I told him around 3:15, he immediately grabbed his phone and started searching local news. Morrison and Detective Walsh exchanged glances. He was looking for reports of an attack. Yes, but there was nothing yet. It was too soon. Derek made me tell him the entire story 3 times, every detail. Which direction Bruno had come from when he returned, exactly how much blood there was, everything. Then he made a decision. What decision, Jennifer? Jennifer looked directly at Morrison, her expression one of absolute misery and shame. He said we couldn't report it. He said if we reported that Bruno had attacked someone, his career was over. His K-9 certification would be revoked. Bruno would probably be euthanized. He said maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe whoever it was would be fine, and there'd be no permanent damage. Sophia, watching from behind the glass, let out a sound of anguished rage. Detective Morrison's colleague put a hand on her shoulder, but Sophia shook it off, her eyes fixed on Jennifer Cole. Derek said to wait, Jennifer continued, to see what happened. He went back to the wedding so people wouldn't be suspicious about him leaving. He told me not to answer the door if anyone came by, not to talk to anyone. For the next few days, he obsessively checked the news, checked police reports, and then the stories started coming out. About Emma Rodriguez. About a 3-year-old girl who'd been mauled by a German shepherd in her own backyard, who'd been hospitalized, who'd nearly died. Jennifer was sobbing now, her words barely intelligible. When Derek read the first news story, he threw up, just ran to the bathroom and threw up. But then he came out and said we had to stick to our story, that it was too late to come forward now, that admitting it would only make everything worse. Did he do anything else? He destroyed the pink fabric, burned it in the fireplace. He had me write out a timeline of exactly what I would say if anyone ever asked where Bruno was that day. He checked his own phone to make sure his GPS data showed him at the wedding most of the afternoon. He thought of everything. Jennifer looked up at Detective Morrison with red, swollen eyes. For 6 months I've lived with this. 6 months of nightmares about that little girl. When I saw her today in court pointing at Bruno, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. Derek doesn't know I'm here. He's going to hate me, but I deserve it. God, I deserve so much worse. Detective Morrison sat back in her chair. Jennifer, you're going to need your own attorney. You understand that you could face criminal charges for your role in this. I know, Jennifer whispered. I don't care. That little girl deserves justice. I should have come forward the day it happened. I'll never forgive myself for not doing that. Behind the glass, Sophia Rodriguez stood with tears streaming down her face. But this time, they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of vindication. Finally, after 6 months of being told they couldn't find the dog, after 6 months of watching her daughter suffer, the truth was coming to light. And the people responsible were going to pay. The night had deepened over Denver. the courthouse windows now reflecting the city lights like dark mirrors. It was nearly 10 p.m. when Detective Morrison finally approached the interrogation room, where Officer Derek Matthews waited with his attorney. The recording of Jennifer Cole's confession had been transcribed, verified, and was now sitting in a manila folder under Morrison's arm, evidence that would dismantle whatever defense Matthews might attempt to construct. Richard Cross, Matthews' attorney, met Morrison in the hallway before she entered. He was a seasoned lawyer in his 50s with silver hair and the weary expression of someone who had defended too many guilty clients. "Detective Morrison," Cross said quietly, "I've advised my client of his rights. He understands the severity of the situation. Before we begin, I need to know, has Jennifer Cole made a statement?" Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Cole came involuntarily at 6:47 p.m. She's been very cooperative." Cross closed his eyes briefly and Morrison saw his jaw tighten. He knew what that meant. Whatever story Matthews had been planning to tell, it was over. "I see. In that case, I need a few more minutes with my client." "You have 10 minutes," Morrison said. "But Mr. Cross, you should know, we have security footage, phone records, GPS data, and now an eyewitness account. The only question at this point is whether your client wants to tell his side of the story or let everyone else tell it for him." 20 minutes later, Morrison entered the interrogation room with Detective Walsh. Matthews sat at the metal table, looking like he'd aged a decade since that morning. His uniform, which had been so crisp and perfect in the courtroom, was now rumpled. His tie was loosened and his eyes were hollow. His hands, which had rested so confidently on Bruno's head just hours ago, now lay flat on the table, trembling slightly. Morrison placed the folder on the table but didn't open it. She started the recording equipment, stated the date, time, and who was present, and then sat back in her chair, waiting. "My client wishes to make a statement," Cross said, his voice heavy with resignation. "But first, we want assurances that his cooperation will be taken into account during sentencing negotiations." "I can't make promises," Morrison replied, "but the DA will be informed of any cooperation. That's the best I can offer." Cross looked at Matthews, who nodded slowly. The attorney gestured for him to proceed. Matthews cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. Not at first. I swear to God I didn't know." "Start from the beginning, Officer Matthews," Morrison said. "April 20th, your brother's wedding." Matthews nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. "I left for Colorado Springs around noon. The wedding was at 2. Bruno was home with Jennifer, my girlfriend. She'd watched him before. I trusted her. I trusted Bruno." His voice caught. "I shouldn't have." He took a breath and continued. "The ceremony was just starting when Jennifer called, around 3:15. I stepped outside to take it. She was crying, really upset, saying Bruno had gotten out, that he'd been gone for over an hour." "What did you think when she told you that?" "I was angry, furious. Bruno was everything to my career. A K-9 officer without his dog is nothing. I asked her if anyone had seen him, if she'd called the police, if he was hurt. She said no to all of it, said he just came home on his own and seemed fine." Matthews rubbed his face with both hands. Something in her voice was off. She was too nervous even for the situation. "I asked her again if Bruno was okay, if anything had happened. She insisted he was fine, but I didn't believe her." "So you left the wedding," Morrison stated. "Yes, I told my family I had a work emergency. My brother was pissed. It was his wedding and I was supposed to be his best man. But all I could think about was Bruno. If something had happened to him, if he'd bitten someone or attacked another dog, my career was finished. I had to know." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "I broke every speed limit getting back to Denver, got there around 4:20. Jennifer met me at the door and I could tell immediately that she'd been lying. She was terrified. Her eyes were red from crying and she could barely look at me." "What did she tell you?" She tried to stick to her story at first, that Bruno was fine, that nothing had happened. But I went straight to the backyard and examined him. That's when I found it. Matthew's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The pink fabric caught in his teeth. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the recording equipment. I held it in my hand, Matthews continued, his eyes distant, seeing that moment again. This tiny piece of pink fabric with little white flowers on it, and I knew exactly what it meant. Bruno had bitten someone wearing pink clothing. What did you do? I confronted Jennifer, made her tell me everything. She broke down, told me about the blood, about washing him, about how long he'd been gone. I felt sick, physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Matthews looked up at Morrison for the first time, and his eyes were filled with anguish. For about 10 minutes I was going to do the right thing. I was going to call it in, report what had happened, face whatever consequences came. Jennifer was begging me to do it, saying we had to report it. And I almost did. I had my phone in my hand. But you didn't, Morrison said. No, the single word carried the weight of 6 months of guilt. I started thinking about everything I'd worked for. 7 years on the force, 4 years with Bruno, 200 successful busts, commendations, awards. My entire identity was wrapped up in being a K-9 officer, and I thought maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe whoever Bruno had bitten would be okay. Maybe they wouldn't even report it. His voice took on a bitter, self-loathing tone. I convinced myself that reporting it would only destroy lives, mine, Jennifer's, Bruno's, and wouldn't actually help whoever got bitten. The damage was already done. Coming forward wouldn't undo it. So you destroyed the evidence, Morrison said. Matthews nodded. I burned the fabric in the fireplace. I questioned Jennifer over and over to make sure no one had seen Bruno. I checked to make sure my phone's GPS showed me at the wedding. I created a timeline, a story. I made Jennifer memorize it. And then you waited, Morrison prompted. Then I waited, Matthews confirmed. I checked the news constantly. Every local station, every police report that came through the department. And then, 2 days later, the story broke. 3-year-old girl mauled by German Shepherd in her backyard. Hospitalized, critical condition. His voice broke completely. I read her name, Emma Rodriguez. I saw her picture, this beautiful little girl with curly hair and a huge smile, and I saw what Bruno had done to her. The photos from the hospital, the description of her injuries, the bite on her arm that nearly severed an artery, the wound on her back, the trauma. Tears were running down Matthew's face now, unchecked. I wanted to die. I actually wanted to die. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I looked at Bruno, I saw that little girl. But by then it was too late. 2 days had passed. If I came forward then, I wouldn't just lose my job, I'd face criminal charges for covering it up. So you said nothing. Morrison's voice was hard now, unsympathetic. I said nothing, Matthews confirmed. I watched the news reports about the search for the dog. I saw the family put up flyers. I saw the mother on TV begging for information. And I said nothing. He looked directly at Morrison now, his face a mask of self-hatred. Do you want to know the worst part? The absolute worst part? When animal control officers came to the department to check if any K-9s matched the description, I was there. I was in that meeting, and I vouched for every dog, including Bruno. I told them our K-9s were accounted for and couldn't possibly be involved. Detective Walsh, who had been silent until now, spoke up. You actively obstructed the investigation. Yes, Matthews said simply. I obstructed the investigation. I lied to my fellow officers. I betrayed the oath I took. And every day for 6 months I watched that little girl's family suffer while I kept silent. Morrison opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. They were images of Emma's injuries, taken at the hospital. The bite wound on her arm, angry and red with stitches. The puncture wounds on her leg, the long gash on her back. This is what your silence protected, Morrison said coldly. Not just your career, Not just your dog, this. A 3-year-old child suffering, her nightmares, her trauma, her family's anguish. Matthews stared at the photos, fresh tears falling onto the table. I know, God, I know, when I saw her today in court pointing at Bruno saying bad doggy, his voice dissolved into sobs. She's so little, she's just a baby, and I let her suffer. I let her family search and wonder and hurt all to protect myself. Cross put a hand on his client's shoulder, but Matthews shook it off. No, I need to say this. I need to own what I did. He looked up at the camera recording the session, as if speaking directly to Sofia and Emma Rodriguez. I'm sorry. Those words are so inadequate, but I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I chose my career over a child's well-being. I chose my own comfort over justice. I betrayed everything a police officer is supposed to stand for. Matthews took a shuddering breath. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come. I'll plead guilty to obstruction of justice, filing false reports, whatever charges you bring. I won't fight it. And I'm prepared to testify about everything, every lie I told, every piece of evidence I destroyed, every time I obstructed the investigation. He looked at Detective Morrison with red, swollen eyes. I can't undo what I did. I can't give that little girl back her sense of safety, but I can at least tell the truth now. It's 6 months too late, but it's all I have left to offer. Morrison closed the folder and stood. Officer Matthews, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, filing false police reports, and animal control violations. Your K-9 certification is revoked effective immediately, and you're suspended without pay pending criminal proceedings. As Detective Walsh moved to formally cuff Matthews, the disgraced officer had one final question. Bruno, he said quietly, what's going to happen to Bruno? Morrison's expression was cold. That's not your concern anymore. Bruno will be evaluated by animal behavior specialists. Given his training and the circumstances, he'll likely be retired to a specialized facility rather than euthanized. But you'll never see him again. Matthews nodded, accepting this final loss. As Walsh led him from the room, he looked back once more at the photos of Emma's injuries still spread across the table. I hope someday she can forgive me, he whispered. Morrison didn't respond. Some things, she knew, were beyond forgiveness. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary day in courtroom 4B. The autumn air carried a crisp promise of winter as Sofia Rodriguez once again climbed the steps of the Denver Federal Courthouse. But this time, everything was different. This time, Emma walked beside her mother, holding her hand with confidence rather than fear. The little girl wore a sunshine yellow dress with white daisies, a deliberate choice by Sofia to symbolize hope and new beginnings. Emma's dark curls bounced as she climbed each step carefully, her small legs working hard to match her mother's stride. Mommy, are there going to be lots of people? Emma asked, her voice clear and steady, so different from the traumatized whisper of 3 months ago. Yes, Mija, Sofia replied, squeezing her daughter's hand gently. But they're all friends, people who want to celebrate you. Because I was brave, Emma asked, tilting her head up to look at her mother. Sofia's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Because you were the bravest. The hallway outside the courtroom was indeed packed. News cameras lined the walls, their red recording lights already glowing. Reporters called out questions, but Sofia and Emma moved through the crowd protected by a wall of support. Sofia's sister Maria, their extended family, and 2 victim advocates from the DA's office who had become like guardian angels over the past months. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was completely transformed from that chaotic day in late summer. Today, the room was filled with warmth and anticipation rather than tension and shock. Judge Margaret Chen sat at the bench, and when Sofia and Emma entered, she smiled, something those who knew her rarely witnessed in a professional setting. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma, please come forward, Judge Chen said warmly. As they approached, Emma noticed familiar faces in the gallery. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Yee, who had helped her process her trauma through play therapy and art. Detective Morrison, whose thorough investigation had brought justice. Even some of the bailiffs from that original day, who had watched a 3-year-old child change the course of a criminal case with just 2 words. And in the front row sat representatives from 3 different child advocacy organizations, present to honor Emma's courage. Judge Chen gestured to chairs that had been placed before the bench. "Please sit. We're not here for anything scary today. Today is a celebration." Emma climbed onto the chair, her legs dangling well above the floor. Sophia sat beside her, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's back. "Emma," Judge Chen began, her usually stern voice softened, "do you know why we asked you to come back today?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy said you want to give me an award for telling the truth about the bad doggy." A ripple of emotional laughter moved through the courtroom. Even Judge Chen smiled. "That's exactly right. But before we do that, I want to tell you a story. Is that okay?" Emma nodded again, her eyes wide and attentive. "3 months ago, you came to this courtroom. You were very scared, weren't you?" "Yes," Emma said quietly. "The bad doggy was here." "He was, and even though you were scared, even though you were more scared than you'd ever been, you did something incredibly important. You pointed at that dog and you told us the truth. Do you remember what you said?" Emma's voice was small but clear. "I said bad doggy hurt Emma." "You did, and because you were brave enough to tell the truth, even when you were scared, something wonderful happened. We were able to find out what really happened to you. We were able to help you and your mama get answers. And we were able to make sure the people who did wrong things had to face consequences for their actions." Judge Chen leaned forward slightly. "Emma, sometimes grown-ups forget that children can be heroes too, but you reminded all of us. You reminded us that telling the truth matters, no matter how scary it is. You reminded us that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference." She picked up a framed certificate from her desk. "On behalf of the Denver District Court and the City of Denver, I am presenting you with the Youth Courage Award. This is given to young people who show extraordinary bravery in the face of fear. Emma Rodriguez, you are the youngest person ever to receive this award." The courtroom erupted in applause as Judge Chen came down from the bench and knelt beside Emma's chair, presenting her with the certificate. The frame was decorated with colorful flowers and butterflies, something clearly chosen with a 3-year-old in mind. Emma took the certificate carefully, studying it with serious attention. "It has my name on it," she said with wonder. "It does, because you're a hero, Emma." Cameras flashed as Emma smiled, a genuine, joy-filled smile that had become more frequent as the months of therapy helped her heal. Sophia wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter receive recognition for the courage that had cost her so much. But Judge Chen wasn't finished. She stood and addressed the courtroom, her voice carrying to every corner. "I want to take a moment to talk about what has happened since that day in August. Officer Derek Matthews pled guilty to obstruction of justice, filing false police reports, and animal control violations. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and permanently barred from law enforcement. Jennifer Cole pled guilty to obstruction of justice and received 18 months probation and community service. Both have issued formal apologies to the Rodriguez family." She paused, looking at Sophia. Mrs. Rodriguez reached a settlement with the Denver Police Department in the amount of $750,000, which will go toward Emma's ongoing therapy, medical expenses, and educational future. The department has also implemented new protocols for K-9 officer oversight and mandatory reporting of any incidents involving police dogs. More applause filled the courtroom. Sophia nodded in acknowledgement, though everyone knew no amount of money could truly compensate for what Emma had endured. "As for Bruno," Judge Chen continued, and the room quieted. "After extensive behavioral evaluation, It was determined that Bruno's attack on Emma was an isolated incident likely triggered by the stress of being unsecured and the confusion of being in an unfamiliar area. Bruno has been retired from police service and placed in a specialized sanctuary for former working dogs in rural Montana, where he will live out his days under careful supervision and monitoring. Emma, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. "Is the bad doggy going to hurt other kids?" Judge Chen knelt down again to be at Emma's eye level. "No, sweetheart, the bad doggy can't hurt anyone anymore. He's in a special place where people make sure he's safe and that everyone else is safe too. Do you understand?" Emma nodded slowly. "Okay, that's good. I don't want him to hurt other kids like he hurt me." The compassion in that simple statement, a 3-year-old's concern for other children despite her own trauma, left barely a dry eye in the courtroom. Dr. Sarah Yi, Emma's therapist, was called forward to speak. "I've been working with Emma for 3 months now," she told the assembled crowd. "When she first came to me, she had severe PTSD, night terrors, and was terrified of all dogs, even small ones. Today, I'm proud to say that Emma has made remarkable progress. She's sleeping through the night most nights. She's playing with other children again. And just last week, she was able to pet a small, trained therapy dog during one of our sessions." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, tears flowing freely. Dr. Yi smiled at her. Emma's resilience is extraordinary. The confrontation in the courtroom, while traumatic, actually helped her begin to process what had happened. She was able to identify her attacker, to speak her truth, and to see that truth acknowledged and validated. For a trauma survivor, especially a young child, that validation is incredibly powerful. Detective Morrison was invited to speak next. She approached with a small gift box, which she presented to Emma. "This is from all the detectives and officers who worked on your case," she said. "We wanted you to know how proud we are of you." Emma opened the box to find a small stuffed bear wearing a detective's badge. Her face lit up with delight. "He's a detective bear." "That's right. His name is Badge, and his job is to remind you that you helped real detectives solve a real case. You were part of our team, Emma." The presentation continued with representatives from child advocacy groups speaking about Emma's impact. Her story had already inspired changes in how child testimony was handled in traumatic cases. Several organizations had used Emma's case to secure funding for improved child witness support programs. Finally, Judge Chen invited Sophia to speak. The courtroom fell silent as Sophia stood, Emma holding her hand. 3 months ago, Sophia began, her voice shaking with emotion, my world was darkness. For 6 months before that day, I had watched my daughter suffer. I had held her through nightmares. I had seen her fear every dog, every loud noise, every unexpected movement. I had searched desperately for answers that seemed impossible to find. She looked down at Emma, then back at the crowd. When I brought Emma to this courtroom that day, I had no idea what was about to happen. I just needed to work and I had nowhere else to take her. But what happened? What Emma did changed everything. Her voice grew stronger. My daughter, at 3 years old, did what trained officers and experienced investigators couldn't do. She identified her attacker. She spoke her truth. She refused to let fear silence her. Sophia's tears flowed freely now. People keep calling her a hero, and I agree. But I want Emma to know something else, too. She knelt beside Emma's chair. Mija, you are brave, you are strong. And what happened to you doesn't define you. Yes, a bad thing happened. Yes, you were hurt. But look at you now, wearing a yellow dress, smiling, accepting awards, helping other children by sharing your story. You took something terrible and you're turning it into something good. Emma hugged her mother tightly. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, Mi Corazon, more than all the stars in the sky. As the ceremony concluded, people lined up to congratulate Emma and Sophia. Reporters requested interviews. Photographers captured the moment. But through it all, Sophia kept Emma close, protecting her even in celebration. One reporter managed to ask Emma directly, Emma, what do you want other kids to know? kids who might be scared to tell the truth about something bad that happened to them. Emma thought for a moment, then spoke with the simple wisdom of a child who had lived through darkness and found light on the other side. "Tell somebody," she said. "Even if you're really, really scared, tell somebody the truth, because then the grown-ups can help make it better." As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Sophia carrying the framed award and Emma clutching Detective Badge the Bear, the autumn sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the courthouse steps. Camera crews captured the image that would run on evening news broadcasts across the country: a mother and daughter, walking hand in hand, facing the world together. 6 months after a vicious attack that could have destroyed her, Emma Rodriguez had not only survived, she had triumphed. Her 2 words, "bad doggy," had exposed corruption, brought justice, and inspired changes that would protect other children. Sometimes the bravest voices are the smallest ones. Sometimes 2 words can change everything. And sometimes justice arrives in a yellow dress, carrying a detective bear, ready to face whatever comes next with the courage that comes from knowing you told the truth, even when it was scary. Emma's story was far from over. There would be more therapy sessions, more healing, more growth. But on this autumn day, surrounded by love and support and recognition, Emma Rodriguez smiled, a 3-year-old hero who had proven that even the smallest among us can stand up for what's right. And in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the entire system that had failed her. The bad doggy was gone. The truth had prevailed. And Emma, finally, could begin to simply be a child again, brave, resilient, and surrounded by a community that would never forget what she had taught them about courage.